right now, there is a 10-person startup in Nairobi, and they are executing the exact same complex, highly nuanced Swahili language market research that, you know, used to require a massive multi-million-dollar contract.
Right, like a multi-year deal with a Fortune 500 consulting firm.
Exactly. And they are doing it today with software they literally downloaded for free. I mean, the invisible wall that was protecting all these high-paying Western cognitive jobs hasn't just cracked, it has completely evaporated.
It really is an overnight collapse of structural advantages that took, what, a century to build?
Yeah, easily a century.
Because when the marginal cost of intelligence drops to near zero, the entire geography of wealth it shifts instantly.
It really does. So we're jumping straight into the deep end today. We're going to be unpacking this brilliant piece of economic analysis called the Eastern Acceleration, how cheap AI compresses Western wages faster.
A very provocative title.
Oh, absolutely. But I want to set a quick ground rule for our deep dive today. This is an entirely open exploration. We are not here to hand you, the listener, definitive answers or confirm some grand unified theory of global economics.
Right. There's no neat bow to tie around this.
No neat bows at all. We are just using these ideas to generate better questions, poke at the edges of prevailing theories, and view the global labor market from entirely new angles.
Because honestly, anyone claiming to have a permanent map of this territory right now is just selling you something.
Yeah, 100%.
We are dealing with moving variables. We're looking at this massive collision between open-weight AI models, and by that I mean highly capable systems running locally without those expensive paper token API structures and global labor costs.
Which is huge.
It is.
Yeah.
That collision is sending shockwaves through the economy right down into the actual bedrock of Western political systems.
And to you listening right now, you've heard the wall-to-wall hype about AI.
The utopian dreams, the doomsday scenarios, all of it.
Right, all the noise. But we are looking past the science fiction today. We want to explore how this specific shift alters the fundamental value of your daily work, the resilience of your local community, and the global market you navigate every single morning.
We're throwing the doors wide open.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the core concept driving this entire shift is the evaporation of the Western knowledge worker moat. But what was actually in that moat before it dried up?
Well, it was essentially a moat built on access constraints. I mean, for the last 50 years, a financial analyst in London, or say a systems engineer in Seattle, commanded a massive wage premium.
Right, they were paid incredibly well.
Exactly. But it wasn't necessarily because their baseline biological intelligence was wildly superior to someone elsewhere. It was because they had access to an ecosystem that was just prohibitively expensive to replicate.
So things like expensive proprietary software.
Yes, and access to institutional memory, locked inside elite corporate networks. They had advanced degrees from universities that basically function as gatekeepers, and they networked on exclusive platforms.
So that premium was really just the toll you paid to cross that moat. If you wanted the output, you had to pay the gatekeeper who held the tools.
That's exactly it. And what's fascinating here is the actual mechanics of how open-weight AI dismantles that infrastructure.
Walk me through that.
So when we talk about open-weight models like Llama 3 or Qwen RPIs, we aren't just talking about a free chatbot on a website. We are talking about the underlying neural architecture being freely available for anyone to download.
You actually own the model.
Right. You aren't renting compute from some massive tech giant and paying a tax on every single word you generate. You possess it. The institutional knowledge of the world has been scraped, compressed into statistical weights, and just handed out.
Which means the expensive training is totally digitized.
Digitized and democratized.
And the economic math that follows that is just brutal. I mean, let's look at a concrete comparison here. You have a software engineer in San Francisco charging, let's say, $150 an hour. And then you have an engineer in Lagos charging $25 an hour. Now, previously, the San Francisco engineer could justify that 6x premium through their access to those proprietary tools, the networks, those institutional shortcuts we talked about.
But now, both of those individuals are staring at the exact same screen. They are utilizing the exact same open-weight AI assistant to write, debug, and optimize their code.
So the axis asymmetry drops to basically zero.
It vanishes. And when the axis asymmetry drops to zero, cognitive labor shifts toward a commodity market.
Wow.
And in a commodity market, the lower cost producer wins by default.
Okay, let me try to map this onto a physical system because this feels mechanically identical to Malcolm McLean inventing the shipping container in the 1950s.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right, because before standard steel containers, moving goods was this bespoke, highly localized thing. You had longshoremen manually loading individual crates of machinery and like sacks of grain.
Just forever.
Forever. The friction was immense, so local manufacturing had this massive protective geographic moat. But the moment you standardize the steel box, you standardize the transport.
Yeah, a box loaded in Shenzhen moves seamlessly to a ship, then to a train, then to a warehouse in Ohio without a single human touching the contents.
Exactly. The friction of distance just vanished, and global manufacturing became hyper-competitive, completely hollowing out local factory towns. So AI is basically the shipping container for cognitive labor. It standardizes the format of human thought.
It really does. The shipping container analogy perfectly illustrates the destruction of geographic friction, but and I think we have to push back a little here on the idea of a perfectly standardized box of thought.
Okay, how so?
Well, a shipping container holds physical mass, right?
Right.
But cognitive work is deeply contextual. Like, are we assuming a block of code written in Lagos and a block written in San Francisco are perfectly interchangeable just because the AI syntax check is identical?
That's a fair point.
Because business logic, cultural nuance, and user experience, those aren't perfectly standardized. The cognitive output isn't a sealed steel box.
But does it actually need to be perfectly interchangeable? I mean, if I'm building the core cryptographic security layer for a major international bank, sure, I am not treating that code as a standardized commodity. I want the bespoke expert.
Of course.
But if I just need 1,000 lines of routine boilerplate to connect a customer database to a web portal, that is volume work.
Yeah, it's routine.
And if the AI is normalizing the structural output and catching all the syntax errors, the functional difference between the $25 an hour developer and the $150 an hour developer approaches zero. So my question is, does cheap have to equal a perfect substitute or just a good enough substitute at scale?
And that right there is the pivotal question for the next decade. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to clear the threshold of utility.
Right, good enough.
Exactly. Once it clears that threshold, the 6x price difference becomes the absolute only metric a CFO cares about. And while Western boardrooms sit around and debate whether global cognitive labor is a perfect substitute, the Global South is already operationalizing it.
They aren't waiting around for permission.
Not at all.
Which takes us right back to that startup in Nairobi and the sheer speed of local adaptation. Because the assumption in Silicon Valley was always that they would build the models, host the APIs, and the rest of the world would just pay them a microtransaction for every single query.
A tax on intelligence.
Exactly. But open-weight models completely shattered that pipeline.
Let's examine the mechanics of that Nairobi startup for a second.
Yeah.
Because they don't just take an off-the-shelf English-centric model and try to force it to work for their local market.
Right, that would be inefficient.
Yeah.
What they do is they take an open-weight foundation, rent a fraction of the cloud compute needed to train a model from scratch, and they run a fine-tuning protocol.
Okay, what does that actually look like? They basically feed it thousands of high-quality Swahili business documents, regional legal frameworks, local consumer behavior data sets. They encode regional context directly into the weights of the model.
Wow. And because they aren't paying an API toll to some Western tech giant for every single prompt their clients run, their overhead is functionally just server electricity and their own time.
Precisely. They can offer automated, large-scale market research or document processing to local businesses at a price point that makes the standard Western software as a service pricing look completely unhinged.
Unhinged is the right word for it, and we see the same mechanism in Jakarta, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
A local developer there fine-tunes Alibaba's Quinn model specifically for Bahasa Indonesia, and they wrap it in this lightweight, culturally native UI.
So they basically become the dominant automated legal compliance tool for local Indonesian mid-sized businesses.
Yeah. The gap in capability between what that local developer can offer and what a massive premium Western consulting firm can offer is rapidly collapsing.
Because the structural advantage of the Fortune 500 firm used to be their army of junior analysts processing data.
And the Jakarta developer just replicated that entire army in silicon.
So the West loses the volume work. The routine data analysis, the boilerplate code, the standard compliance checks. But the prevailing economic theory insists the West still retains the quote-unquote premium tier, right? The top of the pyramid work.
Yeah, the theory outlines a very specific set of defensible premium roles. Senior system architects who design the overarching infrastructure.
A big picture, folks.
Right. And high liability applications, because someone has to be legally and financially liable when an autonomous system fails, and you obviously can't sue an algorithm.
Very true.
It also includes roles requiring intense regulatory expertise, state security clearances, and fundamentally deep client relationships and brand trust. You know, the people who are paid to sit in the room, read the emotional temperature of the board, and sign their name to the risk.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, and this is where I think we need to aggressively question that assumption. We accept that the West currently holds the brand trust and the high-end strategic architecture, but let's look at that Nairobi startup again.
Heck.
If they are successfully executing the volume work today, delivering Fortune 500 level insights at a fraction of the cost, aren't they actively building their own client relationships? Aren't they establishing brand trust locally, which will eventually scale regionally and then globally?
You are asking if the premium moat is just the next one to evaporate.
Yes. Because the history of disruption is filled with companies that entered the market offering cheap, good enough commodity services, only to systematically move up the value chain.
Like Toyota in the 70s.
Exactly. Toyota entered the U.S. market with cheap, fuel-efficient compacts that Detroit openly laughed at. 30 years later, they built Lexus and completely dominated the premium tier.
That's a great point.
If a firm in the global south dominates the cognitive volume work, why wouldn't they eventually use that massive cash flow to hire their own senior architects? Why do we just assume the West holds a permanent monopoly on trust?
I mean, it's a dangerous form of economic hubris to assume the global south will voluntarily remain the administrative back office of the world.
Right.
If cognitive capability is no longer tethered to geography, the physical laws of business dictate that capital and talent will organize wherever the margins are best.
Yeah.
The Western reliance on brand reputation as a permanent defense strategy might be a rapidly depreciating asset.
And this assumption that the current landscape is somewhat static bleeds perfectly into the next major friction point, which is the nature of the jobs themselves. We hear this constant, comforting drumbeat from tech optimists, Yes, AI will destroy old jobs, but it will create millions of new, better-paying jobs.
Ah, yes. It is the standard Schumpeterian narrative of creative destruction. And to be totally fair, new jobs are absolutely emerging.
Like what?
Things like prompt engineering, AI ethics consultation, model fine-tuning specialists, synthetic data engineers. These are lucrative, highly technical roles existing right now.
But the timeline is what separates this era from literally every technological revolution before it. Let's look at the internet transition. The shift from analog to digital commerce created millions of new roles: cloud architects, UX designers, SEO specialists.
Sure.
But that transition took the better part of 2 decades to fully saturate the global economy.
And 20 years provides a critical buffer. It is an entire generational cohort. It gave the labor market time to absorb the shock.
Right. Universities had time to design new curricula.
Workers had time to transition out of dying industries, maybe take night classes, and re-enter the workforce. And even with that 20-year buffer, the friction was immense. I mean, it created the Rust Belt, displaced millions of manufacturing workers, and permanently altered the political map.
And we are currently looking at an AI displacement curve that isn't 20 years. It is widely projected to be 5 to 10 years. We are compressing a massive generational economic shock into half the time.
And the deeper issue isn't just the velocity, it's the mechanics of the new jobs themselves. We are talking about a moving target.
The moving target completely breaks the traditional model of workforce retraining, doesn't it?
Entirely. The jobs being created by AI today are uniquely vulnerable to the next iteration of the exact same technology.
Give me an example of that.
Consider the prompt engineer of 2024. This is someone highly skilled at coaxing specific, accurate outputs from a temperamental LLM using complex linguistic structures.
Like formatting prompts perfectly to avoid hallucinations.
Exactly. But by 2026, the models themselves will natively understand underlying user intent without requiring all that complex prompt scaffolding. The job of bridging the gap between human language and machine logic is automated by the machine simply becoming better at language.
Oh, wow. Or look at the AI trainer. Right. Right now, thousands of people are employed to painstakingly label data, rating AI outputs to teach the model what constitutes a helpful or polite response.
Reinforcement learning from human feedback.
Yes, exactly. But that role is already being cannibalized by synthetic data pipelines.
It is. Instead of paying a human to label data, AI developers use a massive, highly capable frontier model to generate 10 million perfectly labeled examples of a polite response.
And then they use that pristine AI-generated synthetic data to train a smaller, cheaper, highly efficient model.
The larger AI is essentially cloning its own logic and using it to train a successor. The human trainer is entirely frozen out of the loop.
It's like trying to lay train tracks directly in front of a locomotive that is actively accelerating. You stop to learn a highly specific framework. Let's say you master a tool like LangChain to connect different AI agents. By the time you get your certification, the underlying base model has simply absorbed agentic routing into its native capabilities.
Right, the track you just laid is obsolete before the train even runs over it.
It's crazy.
And this creates what is structurally defined as continuous deformation. The labor market isn't going through a step function transition anymore.
Explain the difference.
So a step function is stable. Your job as a switchboard operator ends, you retrain, and your new job as a network technician begins. It's a solid state change. But continuous deformation means the ground itself is shifting under your feet while you are trying to walk on it.
So if the half-life of a hard technical skill is now measured in months rather than decades, does the concept of retraining actually survive?
It's a tough question.
Like, if specific skills are ephemeral, shouldn't we abandon teaching specific software frameworks entirely and focus purely on absolute human adaptability? Do we just teach psychological resilience and complex problem solving?
I mean, that sounds ideal in a philosophical vacuum, but it fundamentally clashes with how capital is actually deployed. Our entire financial and social infrastructure is built on the step function model.
How so?
Banks do not underwrite 30-year mortgages based on psychological resilience. They underwrite based on a recognizable job title with a predictable historical salary trajectory. Corporate HR algorithms do not filter resumes for adaptability. They filter for specific, demonstrable technical competencies.
And the friction between a fluid, deforming job market and a rigid, static societal structure is where the actual human pain is generated. And that pain is not distributed evenly, is it?
No, it is seeking out one specific demographic with absolute precision.
Which brings us to the hollowing out of the cognitive middle. If we connect this to the bigger picture to understand this, we really have to map out the three distinct tiers of the modern labor market and how AI impacts them.
Let's break them down. At the very top, you have the elite tier. The highly expert, the deeply strategic, the heavily regulated.
We're talking elite trial lawyers, top-tier specialized surgeons, C-suite strategists, high-end creative directors.
Exactly. Their value is rooted in extreme scarcity, nuanced human judgment, and deep networks of trust. For them, AI is a massive force multiplier. A top-tier corporate lawyer uses an AI workflow to synthesize case law that used to require a team of 8 junior associates.
So their personal output skyrockets.
It skyrockets, and because they capture the value of that increased productivity, their wages actually rise. The top is thriving.
Right. Then you have the bottom of the wage scale. And to be clear, we mean the economic wage scale here, not the societal value of the work.
Yes, absolutely. Physical labor, embodied trades, and in-person care work. Plumbers, electricians, HVAC technicians, elder care nurses, physical therapists, agricultural workers.
They are completely insulated from the specific wave of technological disruption.
Because an LLM, no matter how statistically brilliant it is, cannot crawl into a 120-degree attic to solder a copper pipe, nor can it physically maneuver a patient in a hospital bed.
Yeah, the physical world is messy, it's unpredictable, and highly resistant to algorithmic standardization.
Which leaves the middle, the cognitive middle class.
Detail the mechanics of this middle for me. What kind of work are we actually talking about?
We are talking about routine cognitive processing. Middle management, financial auditing, standard accounting, corporate compliance checking, supply chain coordination, junior legal discovery, entry-level software development, medical coding.
It's work that absolutely requires advanced training, almost always a 4-year university degree, but is ultimately routine enough to be codified into a set of repeatable rules.
And if it can be codified.
Can be automated.
Exactly. Let's look at the mechanics of a bank's KYC, Know Your Customer Compliance department. Previously, you needed a team of 15 mid-level analysts cross-referencing customer data against global sanction lists, verifying corporate structures, flagging anomalies.
Right. It required judgment.
It required judgment, but it was bounded judgment. Today, an open weight model tuned for financial compliance can ingest a 1,000-page corporate charter, cross-reference it against real-time global databases, and flag the 3 anomalies that actually require human review in seconds.
So that team of 15 becomes a team of 2 senior reviewers managing an AI workflow.
Exactly. The department isn't eliminated, but it is hollowed. The top 2 analysts move up, becoming AI workflow managers. The bottom 13 are pushed out.
Wow.
And the hollowing out of the middle means the upward mobility ladder is basically kicked away. There are no junior roles left to train the next generation of senior analysts.
So what does this all mean? The impact goes far beyond just a displaced job. We have to look at the sociological profile of who these people are. They are the individuals who played exactly by the rules of the modern meritocracy.
Yeah, they took on the student debt, they acquired the specialized degrees, they earned the professional certifications. They did everything society told them to do to secure a place in the stable middle class.
They bought the house in the suburbs based on the promise that their cognitive skills would continuously appreciate in value.
So what happens when that promise breaks? When someone who spent a decade building an identity around being a senior logistics coordinator realizes the market no longer places a premium on that specific cognitive function.
It's not just a loss of income, it's a total devaluation of professional identity.
The wage always follows the scarcity. When artificial intelligence creates an infinite abundance of routine logic, the artificial scarcity of the human compliance officer drops to 0.
I want to push back on this, though, or at least view it through a different lens. Are we potentially romanticizing the cognitive middle?
What do you mean?
Well, a massive portion of this routine, bureaucratic work-moving data between spreadsheets, writing compliance reports no one reads, sitting in middle management alignment meetings, is what anthropologist David Graeber famously categorized as bullshit jobs.
Yes. It is the administrative bloat of large bureaucracies.
Right. So if we automate the soul-crushing robotic tasks using actual robots, doesn't that theoretically liberate human capital? Does it free up a highly educated middle class to do work that is inherently more human, more creative, or more community-focused?
That's the optimistic view.
Or is the darker reality that our economic system simply refuses to compensate inherently human work unless it's at that absolute elite tier? Are we just grieving the loss of boring bureaucratic jobs purely because they provided $90,000 a year in health insurance?
That is the defining tension of this transition. You are entirely correct that a human brain is capable of profound creativity and empathy, and spending 40 years reconciling column A with column B is a tragedy of human potential.
Yeah.
However, the market does not automatically reallocate a displaced compliance officer into a well-compensated poet, a community organizer, or a local historian. The market values efficiency.
So the transition isn't seamless.
Not at all. If we strip away the well-paying bureaucratic jobs and the economy refuses to pay a living wage for the highly empathetic, human-centric jobs, we are left with a massive cohort of highly educated people facing a catastrophic drop in their standard of living.
And whether we romanticize the bureaucracy or not, the loss of that financial security has immediate explosive consequences. Because these displaced professionals aren't just data points on a labor chart, they are voters.
And that brings this entire economic theory crashing into the reality of global politics.
Yes, and this is where the timelines we discussed earlier become the catalyst for systemic instability. Now, as we explore this final dynamic, I just want to remind everyone we are looking purely at the mechanics of political friction here.
We are impartially examining the economic substrate that fuels voter behavior across the globe.
Exactly. We aren't endorsing the policies or taking sides. We are just tracking the math.
And the math is fundamentally mismatched. This raises an important question. You have an economic transition, the deployment of AI workflows and the hollowing of the middle class that operates on a hyper-accelerated 5 to 10-year timeline.
Right.
But you have Western democracies that operate on 2 to 4 year election cycles.
That's a massive disconnect. A voter who loses their administrative job or sees their wages stagnate in year 2 of the AI build-out does not care about the hypothetical, perfectly optimized new economy that economists promise will arrive in year 10.
They don't. They care about their mortgage payment on the first of the month. They care about their loss of status.
And critically, this cognitive middle class is the political center of gravity in most Western nations. These are the swing voters.
Yeah, they are the high-propensity voters who attend the zoning meetings, sit on the school boards, and historically uphold civic institutions. They were heavily invested in the system because the system was working for them.
But when the meritocratic promise collapses, when their professional identity is commoditized by a server farm, their relationship with the state changes overnight.
The analysis suggests they don't necessarily become radical revolutionaries. They become deeply cynical and highly susceptible to populist appeals.
Let's look at the recent waves of populism across the globe. The structural sources behind the Brexit vote, the rise of the AfD in Germany, the PVV in the Netherlands, Milei in Argentina, or the shifting electorate in the US.
There are obviously numerous complex cultural and social drivers at play there, but beneath all of it is this shifting economic substrate. It is the anxiety of a middle class feeling the ground give way.
When people feel their economic agency vanishing, they do not vote for the efficient global reallocation of labor. They vote for the candidate who promises to make the anxiety stop.
They vote for friction.
Exactly. The political response shifts backward and inward. It manifests as a demand for protectionism.
And this creates an incredible, massive feedback loop.
Let's map the mechanics of this loop. The voters demand action. They push their representatives to implement massive tariffs. They demand strict, complex licensing requirements to protect specific human jobs.
They push for moratoriums on new AI data centers.
Yeah, and they cheer for aggressive antitrust actions aimed at dismantling the foundational tech giants.
Which is fascinating because the tech industry has invested hundreds of billions of dollars into AI infrastructure based on the assumption of frictionless exponential growth. But the sheer speed of that disruption has triggered a massive democratic immune response.
The political friction literally becomes a physical drag coefficient on the technology itself. It's like driving a sports car so fast that the sheer wind resistance, the democratic electorate, eventually forces the car to slow down no matter how powerful the engine is.
That's a great way to picture it. It doesn't matter how fast the AI models scale, they have to navigate a labyrinth of new regulations, labor strikes, and compute limits.
The drag slows the deployment.
And because the deployment slows, the tech companies cannot capture the revenue they projected. Because the revenue drops, the return on that massive pile of capital plummets.
So the loop closes completely. The hyper-efficient economic engine creates immense political backlash, and the political backlash reaches back and throttles the economic engine.
The technological capability is vastly outpacing societal tolerance.
But I want to throw out one final question on this, keeping with our goal of looking at this from new angles. We use the word protectionism, and the tech industry obviously views this democratic drag as a hurdle, a massive inefficiency threatening their capital returns. But is this political friction actually the democratic system working exactly as it was designed to work?
How do you?
If a new technology threatens to hollow out the core stabilizing demographic of a society faster than that demographic can adapt, isn't demanding regulation and hitting the brakes a highly rational, fundamentally healthy response?
I see what you're saying.
We talk about it like it's a bug in the system, but is society insisting on pacing its own evolution actually a feature? Is it possible we actually need this political drag to ensure we don't inadvertently collapse our social cohesion in the blind pursuit of cheap cognitive labor?
I suppose it depends entirely on whether you view the world through the lens of pure economic efficiency or human sociology. Economics views friction as a waste of potential energy. Democracy views friction as the necessary mechanism for deliberation, consent, and survival.
Right.
You are asking if society has the inherent right to refuse an upgrade if the upgrade destroys the social contract. History shows us that societies always attempt to hit the brakes when the velocity of change becomes intolerable.
And that profound tension between the relentless algorithmic efficiency of open-weight models and the messy, slow, desperate human need for stability is exactly where we are living right now.
We really are.
Let's pull the threads together. We have covered a vast amount of terrain today. We started by dismantling the illusion of the Western wage moat, exploring the mechanics of how open-weight AI reduces the access asymmetry between San Francisco and Lagos to practically zero.
We looked at how the Global South is actively weaponizing this shift, using fine-tuning protocols to build highly contextual local AI applications that are rapidly closing the capability gap with premium Western firms.
We stared into the reality of continuous deformation, unpacking how synthetic data pipelines and native model improvements are automating the very new jobs we were told would save us. We examined the hollowing out of the cognitive middle and the sociological pain of a devalued professional identity.
And we traced how that economic compression acts as the substrate for a global populist feedback loop, where democratic friction ultimately rises up to throttle the speed of the technological disruption.
We didn't promise you an endpoint, but we hope we've armed you with better questions. I want you to look at your own professional architecture. Are you relying on a moat built purely on access to tools that are rapidly becoming free?
How much of your daily work is actually just routine volume disguised as bespoke expertise.
And crucially, how do you adapt when the ground under you is constantly changing shape?
Because the challenge isn't learning a new specific skill. The challenge is mastering the art of balance in a totally fluid environment.
To leave you with one final provocative thought, a totally different angle to chew on. We have spent this entire time talking about AI commoditizing logic, standardizing output, and replicating flawless cognitive work at zero marginal cost.
Yeah.
But if perfect logic, flawless code, and optimal strategy become infinitely abundant and completely free, will the ultimate luxury good of the future be human imperfection?
Wow. That is a fascinating inversion.
Think about the mechanics of value.
Yeah.
Value requires scarcity. If perfect algorithmic logic is the cheap baseline everywhere, will we start paying a massive irrational premium for intuition?
For eccentric, unoptimizable mistakes.
Exactly. For the unpredictable, beautiful friction of an actual human mind. When the invisible walls of our cognitive fortresses finally vanish entirely, maybe we'll realize the most valuable asset wasn't the flawless output, but the flawed, irregular human hands that built it. Keep diving deep.